My auto insurance cover my accident. Well, it will if you have
Proper insurance.
the proper insurance, and that's the key. I mean, you can't go driving around in the state of Florida, and until the law changes, this is how it's going to be. You can't go driving around the state of Florida hoping that somebody else has the proper insurance. You've got to take the initiative to buy the proper insurance. And remember, we've talked about this in previous questions, and that is, state of Florida is required, insurers in this state are required to offer that coverage automatically. You get it. The only way to reject it is by signing a rejection form. So it comes with your policy automatically, but do not reject it. That's the best advice that I can give.
And there's one more important thing to mention about coverage, and we've talked about that will protect you in the event that the person who hits you does not have coverage or does not have adequate coverage. There is a thing what's called stacked coverage. And basically what that means is it's also very, very cheap. It's probably the best bang for your buck. If you have coverage, you select that. You will also have another option of whether you want to stack coverage or not. Now, if you only have one vehicle under the policy, you don't need to stack it. But for example,
why don't you define stacking so the public can understand it?
And stacking eventually is, for an example, if you, your wife, and you have two 16, 17-year-olds that live at the house and they each have their own car, or you have two cars and your wife has a car and you have a kid who has a car, if you stack your coverage, think about it as actually stacking the coverage on top of each other. So if you only have $10,000 worth of insurance and you choose I want to stack this coverage, and you have 4 cars, you've just increased your coverage from 10,000 to 40,000 because you have 4 cars on there.
That's exactly.
So if you do have a situation where you own multiple cars, or have a big household where a lot of people drive separate cars, that's another option that you really want to consider, is to stack your coverage.
And it's cheap, right? Because just because you have 4 cars and you've chosen the stacking option doesn't mean that the premium is quadrupled. It just simply, it's just unbelievably inexpensive relative to the benefit that you receive. So you think you're saving money in the short run, but it's going to be very costly in the long run should you ever need it.
Well, and I think the people need to also understand that your insurance is always going to be used, because the first $10,000 of benefits are from your carrier, whether you're the passenger in another vehicle,
right, for the PIP,
whether you're the driver of a vehicle. Your PIP is always going to pay. And we have many clients who are frustrated because they say that they're not at fault. Why should their insurance have to pay? And why?
Florida law, that's why.
It's the law.
It's the law.
And in many cases, if there's uninsured coverage, you want it to pay, because if your injuries are more than the coverage the other person has, you want to make sure that you get compensated. I tell everybody, if you have hurricane coverage and a hurricane comes through your house and a tree falls on your house, what are you going to do? You're going to call the insurance company to cover your loss, because that's what you paid for.
Yeah, you have insurance and you pay for it,
to
and you
insure
have to use it.
If there's a loss.
It's like buying a car, putting it in the garage, and never using it. Who would ever do that? So
you know, another component of this, and I don't know if you guys have touched on this before, was I get a lot of calls from clients after we have to tell them that the other driver didn't have coverage, why we can't help them. This is after we've done the investigation, whether they have assets. But we get a lot of those calls, so I don't know if they know that in the state of Florida, people aren't required to have bodily injury coverage. So there can be people out there driving that can cause an accident that have chosen not to get that particular insurance.
Right.
And people call in disbelief saying, how do they not have coverage? They told me they had full coverage. They probably do. They probably have the $10,000 in PIP that they're required to have by the state of Florida, but people can simply choose to not get that bodily injury coverage. And if they don't have that and they cause an accident,
you're out of luck. Unless you have the And that's a very good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because how often do we get people, oh, don't worry, I've got full coverage. This is going to be okay because I've got full coverage. That's meaningless. Full coverage is a term that is
created by the insurance company.
Created by the insurance company, which means absolutely nothing.
Biggest misnomer ever. It was created by insurance companies.
It doesn't mean anything.
To give you a false sense of security. Full coverage is really whatever coverage is required by law, and here we don't.
You know what, in our show up in Jacksonville, this came up, and you know, my biggest advice is for individuals to call us to review their policy to see if they have the appropriate coverage to protect them.